Welcome to the Ash Cloud. I'm Ash Sweeting. Beef supply chains have been described as the most dysfunctional and least organised supply chains of everything available in the supermarket. Today we are joined by Lamar Steiger and Neil Mellers from Ranch2Retail, who are building connected beef supply chains to improve the economic performance of the whole chain and environmental outcomes. Data sharing across all participants is a key component of creating and sharing the extra value.
Lamar, Neil, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
So it's no small task to actually start a new supply chain, Lamar. So do you want to start by giving us a bit of your background and also what motivated you to take on that challenge?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having us on your podcast. We're really delighted to be a part of it. So thank you so much. I originally, Ash, came from a pretty big ranch in Wyoming. My grandfather had bought that ranch early in the last century and raised with it. My dad was quite the innovator. He was one of the very first folks in the United States to use continental breeds of cattle, the ones like Charolais and Simmental and all that came from Europe. He was an early adopter of herd improvement data. He was the original member of the American Herd Improvement Federation, is what it was called at that time, which is the grandfather of all the data that the Angus Association and the other associations gather for data. And in the mid 60s, he had quite a serious farm accident. His leg hurt. And so Wyoming winters were tough, and we moved to Arkansas. We bought a ranch and moved a couple hundred Charolais cattle from Wyoming to Arkansas in the Ozark Mountains. I was just in lower elementary school. So my older brothers, Ash, have a lot of fond memories of Wyoming and the romance of it. But my dad said they weren't old enough to really understand how hard the work was at that time, without air conditioner or heated cabs in tractors and all those kind of things. And so grew up right here in Bentonville. At that time, Walmart was very small. Bentonville was around 5,000 people. And Walmart was just one of many of these discount retail stores that were regional. They probably had 20 something stores in 1970 when they went when they got themselves organized as Walmart Inc. And grew up right here. And I actually married Sherry, my high school sweetheart, who was her dad was president of Walmart and kind of the brains behind a lot of the good things that happened at Walmart, like everyday low price and everyday low cost is the model that Walmart embraced in the late 70s. It was his idea. He was the father of the barcode. He came up with a lot of the or for the idea with a man in the hosiery business for the barcode, and he also connected all the stores by satellite without Mr. Walton's permission, which is quite a great story actually, and all these different things that he did to implement at Walmart that really took Walmart from good to great, and he was quite the adopter of technology and ideas. And one of those was in the late 80s, he really introduced the idea of partnerships with suppliers and vendors that sold to Walmart instead of being adversarial. And so being a product of my father and also for working with my father-in-law on his Angus ranch, which he had besides running Walmart, the two together really were dreamers, and they were strategists and big thinkers. And so I think I inherited a lot of that or just picked it up by hanging around them. And so I had some pretty big ideas by 2014 when Walmart asked me to help them with their beef supply chain. And maybe I'll pause there. Neil, maybe you would tell a little bit about your background, and then we'll bring it all together there from 2014 on.
Yeah, Ash, thanks for having us. I come a little bit different background, more from a CPG background. Raised Southwest Missouri, went to the University of Arkansas, and I always tell Lamar, met a girl, got a job, started having kids, and it escalates quickly. But this is home now. It's been home for the last 20 years. But kind of grew up in CPG, actually stocking shelves at Walmart, which has always kind of served me well as kind of We could sit in a room like this or in front of a computer on a podcast, right? And make some decisions that sound good, but then don't make any sense for executing across 4,500 stores. So that experience has always kind of served me well. Took a little bit of an analytical route. Did category management. What that means for Walmart is drawing modulars, actually setting a assortment strategy for lawn and garden category, and then went to work for a family farmer co-op, about 1,800 family farmers known as Welch's. So sold lots of Welch's grape jelly to some big customers, big retail customers, and really kind of grew to love, you know, working on behalf of those family farmers was not just about like, hey, did we hit our shareholder quarterly earnings? How's our stock price doing? Or like, there was a really real story there, right? Of being a co-op, the farmers, owned our business. We existed only to help them move that product, and work closely with the retailer and have a great partnership there, kind of back and forth. So that was a really fun time, just to kind of on both sides, working on behalf of the farmers. And I would say with our retail partners, we got a lot of great feedback from them as well, and that they really cared. They really leaned into kind of the genuine, story there, back to the family farmers. So long story short, started my own brand a few years ago. We exited that brand about a year or two ago, and then that started my relationship here at Ranch2Retail.
He and his partner started a water brand.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And if you know a little bit about retail, there are 1,000 different suppliers that have come up with an idea for the better water packaging.
Yeah, we could have picked an
And,
easier category.
And these guys, like, they started with the very hardest category that there is to sell into a retailer, and they had quite a bit of success, actually.
We did, yeah. And we really started that probably for a different time, but we started that on the inside of really selling the brand more than the liquid. Because when you're selling just water, right? This can be a little different in our conversation today, but when you're selling just water, it's a lot about the branding. And I mean, I could argue it's that way some for beef as well. But man, there's a lot of quality and differentiating attributes that come through in the beef category, a little different than water. But definitely learned a ton through that process. I came again through big CPG, kind of classically trained, and then I had the very humbling experience of going to try to start something from scratch with just a couple folks, and just a lot. We were celebrating not truckloads of product, but cases or even individual units of product, right, being sold. But learned a ton through there, and grateful for kind of that expertise, kind of both sides of that expertise. I think serves me well now. So
And you two have been together for how long now?
So we started Ranch2Retail about a year ago, I
yeah,
guess.
it's
Is when
right
we
out of
really
here. Yeah,
we
yeah,
started visiting with each other, and my partner at Ranch2Retail is a family, the Whaley family, who've done services for the Walmart egg supply chain and other retailers' egg supply chain, and we've seen it that as we talked about the beef supply, that the perimeter of the store,
yeah,
the perimeter is the refrigerated fresh, mainly meat and eggs and a few other things.
yeah,
But the perimeter of the store is one of the very last supply chains of those items around the perimeter that are refrigerated, that anybody's really tackled seriously to get those supply chains organized. Neil and I can tell story after story after story that the center part of a retail store or the center part of a grocery store has items that are very digitalized. They're very precise down to the 1/100th of a penny in cost.
yeah,
And when a retailer needs thousands of an item, they know exactly when they need them. They know, and maybe it's hundreds of thousands of an item. They know exactly when they need them. They know exactly how they're going to get them. They know exactly their pricing way, way far in advance. But then when you look at the perimeter of the store, and that's our area that's really interesting, besides the eggs
hmm
at my partner's company, but it's the beef supply chain. And
hmm
so the beef supply chain is one of the most dysfunctional and least organized supply chains of everything that a retailer buys. And that goes back to 2014, Ash, that I mentioned a minute ago, was that the CEO of Walmart and I were having dinner. We were having these huge tomahawk steaks. And he said, why is the US beef supply chain the most dysfunctional supply chain of anything Walmart buys? And I was kind of set back as a rancher on my heels. I was like, it can't be the worst. And you know, it might be the worst. And so he and the beef team hired me as a consultant. And for a decade, I helped the Walmart meat team to really take a hard look at how the meat business worked. The first year and a half that they hired me was so much fun. Probably 2 years as we just traveled around the country and just sat in front of the best ranchers that I knew, the best feedlot operators that I knew, and just said, hey, the CEO of Walmart wants to know what you think could be a solution to improving the meat supply chain. And Walmart's huge, you know, it has like 4,600 stores, the company. Almost all of those are grocers. They still have a few just general merchandise stores around the country, but most of them have grocery.
Yeah.
And when you try to have a consistently good product at a consistent price that gives the customer a great beef eating experience at 4,600 stores, it's really, really difficult when we have 600,000 ranchers in the United States who are all experts. And we all think, me included, we all think that we have it figured out and we know exactly what the best beef is. And so it's really, really hard to kind of get those things organized.
But I would just add it's worth it, right? Because those fresh, those categories, those perimeter store categories are traffic generating for those retailers. And it's of course about having that really great quality steak or, you know, seafood, chicken, whatever it is, but like having those good perimeter store category product. But it's also about all the other items that are sold with that product, right? You're building baskets, you're bringing traffic in the store. So while the perimeter store is harder, it's absolutely worth it because it's so critical, you know, to those retailers.
So, part of my MBA studies was a fairly comprehensive evaluation of the Australian pasture-based beef supply chain. So I'm sure there's going to be some differences being a different country, but I'm sure there's also going to be a lot of similarities. And you know, certain things like you got thousands of ranchers and producers going, there's a concentration definitely at the packing side of things. You've also got the fact that you're selling an animal as a live weight. So you have rather than a construction type of a business model. So, you know, think about a car or something like that. You buy small parts and you build them up into something bigger and then sell the constructed product. Beef is a destruction. You buy an animal that's walking on four legs. It's got so many different bits and pieces to it, be that the bones, the blood, the different cuts of meat, the skin, all the offal, and they all have hugely variable values of what they're worth, which are all bouncing up and down because they're all driven by market forces. And then once you get that animal with a single live weight price, you then break it down into components, parts, and then try and essentially flog off the component parts. You've also got the fact that day to day you don't know what's coming in your both in terms of volume of and also quantity of product. So you've got all these different challenges that are very unique to the beef supply chain. You've also got the fact that, you know, Australian beef producers, there's quite a few that are quite independently minded, and from my experience of the US, I wouldn't say there's great divergence in that space either. So there's a bunch of different personalities and attitudes and opinions out there as well, and trying to tie that all together. So I guess, where did you start? How do you go about that process given all those moving parts?
Yeah, so you'd be interested. I think you know this part of the story, but the CEO that I had the tomahawk with was Greg Foran. He was the brand new CEO of Walmart US, the US stores, not international and not Sam's Club, but the US stores. And his career, he's a Kiwi by birth, but his career has been in the grocery business all throughout Australia and New Zealand. Before Walmart hired him, he was number two guy at Woolies. And so his experience in Australia before he came here to the United States was to have somewhat of an organized supply. And I think at that time, and I'm not sure what they do now, but at that time, Woolies had their own buyers buying cattle out of the feedlot and their own kind of individual supplies that they knew these cattle came from this ranch, and they were grassroots enough that they had improved the meat selection and had done really well at that time with their meat at Woolies. And so when Walmart hired him, he was a very close friend of my father-in-law's, who was the one I mentioned earlier, the retired Walmart executive who had been a consultant for Woolies for years and years. And so when Walmart hired him, one of the first things he wanted to address was, if Walmart can't win in fresh, they probably can't win because of the traffic driving. And so they have spent the last decade of just improving everything in fresh, from having Walmart now owns their own milk bottling facilities. They've reached back in the supply chain in beef, of course, but in other fresh supply chains as well, as they've gotten involved enough that they can have a better product than they've ever had before. And it takes a long time to improve your fresh supply, and then it takes even longer, Ash, to get your customers to even look at it after you've had kind of a not so good reputation. So he hired me to help introduce his meat team, highly talented meat buyers. They are merchants, and they know, as you talked about the bits and pieces, they know the value. They know exactly. Most of that team, or a lot of the team, have meat science degrees from some of the best meat and science universities in the United States, and they really know the meat. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to have insights into the rest of the supply chain besides just buying the meat from the big four packing plant companies. His challenge was, how do we create our own supply chain so that we can have insights into the entirety of the supply chain, including genetics, all the way back. And my suggestion was the only way to do that would be to be big enough to go around the big four and not to have a contract with any of the big four packing plant companies in the United States. And so Scott Neal at that time ran the beef business. He's now one of the senior executive at Sprouts, based out of Phoenix. And Scott and I and some others that were there started looking at how we could do a supply chain. And frankly, we had, I say now, we had 100 conversations where people were like, sounds like a great idea, but it can't be done. Like, nobody can really do this. And we had one conversation with a rancher in Texas, Bob McLaren. And Bob McLaren is a pretty large Angus breeder down there, and had a history with McLean trucking, and McLean handles fresh delivery, and because they have refrigerated trucks to Walmart and to other retailers as well, and really a brilliant businessman. And Bob McLaren was the first person that we visited that said, yes, let's do this. And so when I took the meat team on that trip down to Cameron, Texas, I made sure that I brought Greg, the CEO, along on that trip, because what I've learned over the years is that if you have two CEOs shake hands, things get done a lot better and a lot faster than they do if you're right in the middle of trying to figure that out. And so Greg and Bob shook hands and said, hey, let's figure this out. And it is really hard to figure out. And it's especially hard to be the first, with the first one to do a supply chain at scale. I mean, we're talking Walmart scale, as opposed to, a farm to table supply chain, that's just around your local region or whatever. And so it took several years to do it, to work it all out. And we had to find a packing plant company that would cooperate and harvest on a toll instead of owning the cattle. We had to find feedlots and backgrounders who were willing to feed on the toll instead of owning the cattle, and doing it the model that they had always done before. And Bob McLaren put together a wonderful team, and the company that he put together for this project is called Prime Pursuits. Warren White had run Mac 6, MC6 feedlot near Amarillo, Texas for years. He owns a couple of sale barns in Nebraska and is just a stand-up, really well-versed guy in all parts of the supply chain up until they hit the back door of a packing plant. And so he was a great partner, or is a great partner for Walmart. And so what they ended up doing after years of negotiation is that Prime Pursuits is a company owned by the McLaren family. Prime Pursuits procures cattle for Walmart. Right, they have to be Angus sired, they have to be upper two-thirds choice. And then those cattle, Prime Pursuits is responsible for making sure that they get from the ranch of origin to the back door of Creekstone, the packing plant that's in Kansas, and Creekstone harvests all the meat for this supply chain. The meat is then sent, the subprimals and grind is then sent to Georgia. And Walmart built they remodeled AmeriCorps freezer building. They remodeled it into a packaging plant, what we call a case-ready plant, to put that meat in the trays that Walmart has. Walmart does not have butchers in the stores, and so all that's prepackaged at the plants. And they have their own plant in Georgia, and now they're building a plant in Kansas as well. They almost have it open, I think. So then that meat from the Prime Pursuit supply chain, then once packaged, it's labeled as McLaren Farm, and it goes out to, I think they're up to about 600 grocery stores in Florida, Georgia, and that part of the world in the very southeast corner of the United States. And so then that supply chain got up and going, and Walmart then decided to look around for a second supply chain. And so we got them introduced to the folks up in Nebraska who are building, and they just opened it up last Monday, a week ago Monday, the Nebraska Sustainable Beef packing plant, brand new facility that's been built in North Platte, Nebraska. And that supply chain is totally separate than Prime Pursuits, and it's got a little bit different set of specs. And so they're trying, they're not trying, they launched the second supply chain at scale.
Mm-hmm.
And what Neil and I talk about a lot is the first supply chains, when you try to get something as disorganized as the American beef industry is, we have these separate silos. The first and second supply chain, those are the hardest. And Walmart has put their resources and their expertise behind trying to figure out how to force a different way of thinking on the American beef supply chain.
Yeah.
Well, so much there, and firstly, hats off and congratulations, because it's that whole, you asked, I don't know how many you got to before you found Bob down in Texas, and he was the one who said yes. And it's just that persistence and the, getting on with it, finding the right partners, and then getting Scott out there, and as you said, the agreement to the handshake between the CEOs as that inflection point, I guess you could call it, in terms of let's get this moving. What in terms of, I guess, the challenges and getting, the cow calf, getting the ranchers on board. Do you want to talk us through how that went? What were the hurdles? And one of the things I'm particularly interested in with all, with ag supply chains or food supply chains are generally quite a bit longer and more complex than many other products.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially the value is going to be captured at the consumer, the final purchase of the product, be it a food service or restaurant, or a consumer taking it home to cook it at home. But most of the value is going to be created in the production process. There's the genetics, there's the early life, there's the backgrounding, and then there's the feeding. And then once you've actually got to the packer, you can only really lose value because you've got the product as good as it's going to be, and you just have to make sure you don't damage it either through, you know, poor cold chains or something, or losing shelf life and all that sort of stuff. So how do you link that sharing of value from where it's captured, which is a long way, both people wise and distance wise, from where it's created?
Yeah, and two things there's the people part and there's the technology part. the
Mhm.
linking, and so I think that Walmart, when they put together Prime Pursuits with their partner Bob, is that they knew, and I think that those of us who are pretty thoughtful in this industry are really at a point where we know that ranchers, we talk all this sustainability, which I'm 100% for, measuring methane as your company does, and figuring out how to do that. But one of the most important sustainable crisis that we have is that for over decades at a time, not one year to the other, that ranchers can actually stay in business. That the ups and downs of the cattle market and the lack of knowing where your cattle are going and being frankly a cow calf guy's kind of a victim of the day
Mhm.
that he sells the cattle, and so I think Walmart is pretty committed to making sure that they pay the ranchers a pretty fair price. And so if you start out with a little bit of a premium to the rancher, then you've got to figure out how to take cost out from the time you pick that animal up or it's delivered away from the ranch to the backgrounder all the way through to how you get it to the store. And I don't think there's a better company in America or probably the world,
Yeah.
Neil,
Yeah.
that does a better job of looking at every penny and every half penny and figuring out how to evaluate each step of the supply to try to figure out how to take some cost out of that.
Mhm.
And whether that is smarter trucking, or whether that is better packaging, less waste on the trim, whatever it is Walmart has these very bright folks that are just so concentrated on just
Yeah.
the most
Laser focused on it.
laser focused
Yeah.
on the most mundane items that I would just kind of go right over. But that's how Walmart was built, by
Mhm.
figuring out how to take cost out, once you buy that item. And so then if you do that, then one of the best cost saving methods is to figure out which animals really do work and feed to the upper two-thirds choice, and which ones don't work, and which ones have the best consumer experience for the eating and all. And then that's when you start bringing in the data. And so I'm so excited about the commitment that they've made in their partnership with Prime Pursuits. And Prime Pursuits has developed an on-the-farm app that they are providing to all of the people that sell the meat into Walmart. And then all the data that Walmart can give them from the harvest facility, and everything you can think of along the way, from death loss to the number of uh, a number of animals, or which animals individually that had the most sickness, or were just problem cattle all the way through, even if they made it to slaughter. There's some of them that just don't do that well. And if we can identify those individually, and that's what Prime Pursuits and Walmart has been able to do, is the sharing of data back and forth across the supply chain. And frankly, Ash, it's shocking to the industry that Walmart would just give this industry back to folks who don't have a long-term commitment to Walmart. I mean, you can sell your cattle 1 year, 2 years, 3 years to Prime Pursuits, and the next year somebody offers you one penny more. But if the thought is that Walmart can provide such great helpful tools to the rancher will choose to sell into an organized supply chain like Prime Pursuits.
Mhm.
In in terms of the premium, there's a lot there once again, but in terms of the premiums you mentioned, I think there's, speaking to ranchers and livestock producers, there's two sides of that. There's the actual paying a higher price is a big part of that, and everyone wants to receive a higher price for what they're selling. But there's also the de-risking side of things, because you're investing in, if you're growing, even if you're growing that calf out to a yearling before you sell it, say, just to keep the numbers simple, there's 9 months of pregnancy plus a year of growing that animal before you get a return on it, and you're investing in that genetics. What's that? 21 months or so? No, 19 months. No, wait, 21 months. Yes. Before before you actually get a return. And
Hmm.
if you have some certainty about what price you're going to get or some level of de-risking, that will help you make decisions earlier on. So is that balance between just taking risk out of it, compared to just adding 10% onto whatever the market price, part of those discussions, or is it more complex than that?
I think the way I would answer that, I don't know from a de-risking standpoint, but the word that comes to me is kind of clarity. That having a key anchor retailer on the end of that supply chain, right? This beef has a destination. We were in a room, candidly, it was Nick and I, Ash, who you've met. We were in a room that probably Nick and I did not deserve to be in. It was a genetic task force meeting for cattle, like a lot of really high level experts in this meeting, and we kind of came in from just a retailer consumer kind of perspective side. But they said, "Hey guys, appreciate you guys being here. Sometimes it can feel like an echo chamber, right? Like what should the ribeye size be, or like what are these genetic and what should it be?" And we just need the clarity, again, that anchor at the end, the retailer, what they're looking for, more importantly, what the consumer is looking for, and then giving those folks a target, a goal to hit, not only from a genetic side, but even certain sustainability initiatives. What does that retailer and what does that consumer really care for? What are they looking for? And then how do we focus? And maybe that's the de-risking, Ash, a little bit of like, how do we focus our efforts on what the ultimate consumer is actually looking for? So I think um, Lamar talked about the 99 conversations and Bob being the one. I think more and more what we've seen over the last, even year is that really has been flipped. And we've probably had 100+ conversations, and we've had one or two, maybe a packer that was like, "Hey, I don't know if that's the right time for us, but maybe soon." So, but like there's a realization of like, okay, man, if we could focus our efforts, if we could focus, I think you said it a little bit, Ash, of instead of each sector maximizing everything that they possibly can, of like, hey, can we focus towards the end goal, right? And then share some of that value back. So that's where my head
And
went.
I think we're
You add
just
to
on the
that.
front end of this, and I said it earlier, in order to get something going, Walmart really had to break the mold and pay some premiums and do that. And
Yeah.
I think that where we need to move to is we need to move to a vertical cooperation where you're agreeing. What I would like to see is where these ranchers who are the professional ranchers who are growing the kind of beef that people want to buy. And we have hundreds of thousands of ranchers in the United States who have 25 head or 40 head, and they're not paying a lot of attention to this. But there's enough of us that are professional ranchers that want to really tune in to this. And I think the next, as this thing evolves from the original Prime Pursuits, then to the Nebraska Sustainable Beef, and then what we're doing at Ranch2Retail is trying to put together some supply chains that are more long-term commitments,
Hmm.
and not just like, hey, we're going to bid on your cattle on Superior because we loved them last year and the year before that they really did well for the packer for Walmart supply chain. We're going to bid and do a premium. We really want to create an environment where people are like, hey, in the years that are not so good,
Hmm.
that you're still going to pay me a fair price. And perhaps in the years that are really, really good, that I won't hit the top of the market, but over a 10-year period of time. And other supplies of fresh have done this. I
Hmm.
mean, it's not like it's impossible to do. I mean, you can have long-term contracts with apples. You can have long-term contracts with other fresh items that work. And so it's just, you mentioned it earlier, a lot of the Australian ranchers are pretty single-minded. And, one of our greatest traits in the United States is this, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and force yourself into success. But I just think that the volatility is not sustainable for ranchers in the future. Land values are so high. It's like,
Hmm.
if you're going to have 3 bad years, why even do it? Just sell out, And so we don't want that. We want people to make a decent amount of money in all phases of the supply chain every year instead of feast or famine.
Hmm. Agree.
Oh,
Yeah, the only thing I'd go ahead, Ash.
oh, very much so on that. And when I was looking at the Australian beef supply chain, it was not uncommon for a producer rancher to book their cattle, their load of cattle into two or three different packers.
Yeah.
And the day before they'd ring up all three, find out which one had the highest price, and then do a no-show at the other two. And then
Yeah.
obviously from that Packers business perspective, when you don't know what you's coming through the door, how many staff do you need? How do you pre-sell anything that you don't know? And
Yeah.
having contracts with your customers, and there's all those knock-on effects, which takes a truckload of value out of the whole supply chain. It's
Yep.
everyone pays
Adds
pays the
cost.
prices of those inefficiencies because if your customer isn't making as much money, how can they pay you a premium because they're struggling? So, but there is frequently antagonistic relationships in those, I got the better of him type sort of,
Yeah.
situation. So there's some ingrained, I guess, cultural things that can frequently need to be overcome. But I think, your approach looks very much like let's find the people who want to participate and let's just run with those people who want to be part of it. And then if the other people change their mind, um, they can come knocking on our door at a later stage. Is that kind of the approach?
Yeah, so you could explain a little bit about our method, what we're doing at Ranch to Retail, and as far as that.
Yeah, I think what we're sorry, where my head went there too, Ash, is just from back to data a little bit, right? Like that's like the silos of data are getting taller within each segment, right? Like ranchers are collecting more data, feedlots are, packers. But like what again, back to back to what we're trying to do at Ranch to Retail is with our customers, with key anchor retailers at the end, like give the supply chain a reason, a reason to trust each other, I guess, right? Like a reason for that data to flow, right? It's nice that the silos are getting taller and we are collecting more data, but man, where that really becomes powerful is we start sharing that data forward and back again, right? And we start sharing that carcass data, and some of that health data, some of that feedlot, that feed intake data back into the system. And so, but we know, like you talked about the dynamics, like that's not really why would they do that, right? And kind of the standard relationship, like what's the next guy going to do with my data? Or what's the previous guy going to do if he knows these are really good quality cattle? I'm going to pay more for them next time, right? Like it's got to be directed toward having that anchor at the end with a retailer and hey, this data system you're going to benefit from, right? Because we're all working toward that end goal, but then you're going to see some of that data flow back that we can all learn from. So, yeah, I guess just to kind of rehash a little bit, like what we're focused on Ranch to Retail is, primarily our customers will be retailers. That Lamar spoke to it a little bit, but that long-term agreement back to giving that beef a destination and providing the clarity up through the supply chain. So Doug, our CEO, says it really well. Like we're a big believer in letting experts do what experts do, right? Like and like we're going to need a lot of great partners, upstream in the supply chain and really, we're focused on, retailers. They don't know all the complication that these feedlot guys have to deal with every day, right? And these ranchers, these producers have to deal with every day. They just can't understand, the ins and outs of what it means to do each of those segments every day. And then same way, right? Like those ranchers, those feedlot guys don't know, setting modulars or promotional assortment strategy and all the things that have to happen on the retail side. We think we can kind of bridge those guys together, and that's what we've been able to kind of do in some other segments. But it's just so important to have, good partners along the way. And we know there's going to be some folks that are perfectly happy to continue kind of, operating in the beef supply chain as it operates now, but more back to the 99 conversations, like more and more so we feel like, I think because of what, Lamar's work on with Walmart on Prime Pursuits, and then what's now going on with sustainable beef. Like there's some momentum, and we really believe there's going to be, some more supply chains coming in the future. And with constrained supply, right? Like if there's a few more big ones, like you're just taking significant chunks of quality out of supply. So, but that's what we're focused on. Ranch retail is again just kind of building, to Lamar's point, vertically collaborative or more connected these supply chains.
And
Directed.
Neil, I think also that Walmart is an anomaly. I mean, it's
Yeah,
just so big.
yeah,
And we've had retailers that have said, like, hey, this is really interesting, but we don't have a $500 million to
yeah,
invest in the supply chain. And we're not in a position where we can build our own case ready plants
yeah,
or that we can buy into a packing plant like Walmart has. And Walmart has that great balance sheet, which gives them a real competitive edge of winning, right? But being behind the curtain, I grew up here in Bentonville. My father-in-law he was a master retailer, but even just getting behind the curtain of the merchants for that decade that I worked with Walmart really gave me some insights that I didn't have at all being a rancher. And so,
yeah,
to Neil's point, I think that other retailers that are not the size of Walmart, that those retailers can use us to help bridge all this expertise together.
yeah,
Walmart can hire their own cowman. They've got a wonderful guy, Grant Keenan, who's a really well-versed feedlot cattle guy.
yep,
But most retailers are not of a size where they're going to hire their own cowboy team, that have all this expertise. And I feel like that, and since I've gotten to be a part of these, I've learned enough that I think we can bridge that and help bring all that together for the right retailers.
yeah. Yeah, those retailers are going to have merchants, right, and buyers, but they can't forward deploy folks, up through the supply chain like Walmart has done.
So where do you see things going forward? What's the vision for the next 5, 10 years?
Yeah, I think I mean we do believe, yeah, there's going to be more supply chains. We've got this I don't know if you're familiar with it, Ash, we could probably send it to you, but kind of the innovation adoption curve, it's more something you would see in tech, right? But like think if you remember that in like the chasm, right? Like there's the early adopters, which we would name prime pursuit, sustainable beef, right? And then we're kind of in that chasm, into Lamar's point of, hey, there's probably not a ton of retailers out there that are ready to go buy a packing plant or buy interest in one or go completely finance one or do something, like what's been done before. But we do believe that curve is coming and that there's going to be more supply chains based on conversations we've had. But that those are going to look a little bit different. And those are just going to look about like with us working with retailers, them providing supply chain again with that kind of target and us be able to kind of align folks to the ultimate goal. And then if you remember the back end of that innovation adoption curve, we believe like in a few years, especially at maybe a major retailer, we could get, potentially, this is our view, like leadership saying, hey, meat team, there's been 5 or 6 more supply chains now. We're seeing our quality start to decline. Should we have gotten a little bit ahead of this, right? And so we think there's a little bit of urgency there, especially with lowest supply since 52, I think is where we're at now, right? And we just believe that's probably going to continue. But there's some interesting dynamics about the industry right now, as I know you're aware, that it's really kind of a great time to be kind of getting ahead of this and building supply chains now. So add to that, Lamar.
In your area of expertise with the methane, um, I really think that it's going to be really hard to make substantial changes and really grasp what all the implications are for the methane and all of the other sustainable practices. That's going to be really, really hard until we can get some connected supply chains. Because you can have one silo that's just like knocking it out of the park on doing all the right things for the environment, for longevity of the product's viability and all of those things. And you can have one of the segments in the beef supply chain that does that so well, and it all just evaporates when it's sold
Yep.
to the next part of the supply chain.
Yep.
And so I think a lot of the solutions for sustainable practices and true regenerative uh, benefit at scale are going to require some organized supply chain.
And some pull through, right? Because what we do now is probably a lot of push, right? A lot of like, hey, sustainability, like, hey, maybe this will increase the quality of my beef, right? And let's push some initiatives and see how far we can push that. Use the milkshake through a straw analogy, right?
Yeah.
But like, how can we again? Sorry to keep going back to it, but with the destination in mind, how do we pull through the things that matter and make a real impact or some progress on
So
sustainability side?
do you agree with that? That
Oh, I think the data is critical, and I think the example I think of on this is a sheep example because it's just a little more illustrative. But if you have you know, ewes can have singles, triplets, or twins. And if you have a ewe that's had triplets, the environmental footprint on the feed intake of that ewe is spread across three lambs. Whereas if you've got a ewe that's got a single, you've got one ewe to one, and the footprint of that ewe to that one lamb. But when you walk into the grocery store and you see the two lamb chops sitting there in the fridge, you don't know which one came from the single, well, which one came from the triplet, and they look exactly the same, but their footprint's going to be possibly, significantly, could be double or triple what the other one is. And it comes back to feed efficiency. It comes back to so many, I remember when I was working for Meat and Livestock Australia, I was doing an innovation program there, and I was speaking to a producer on one of the big stations up in northern Western Australia. So this is 100,000, 500,000 acre type of a place, and or million acre place, and they walked a mob of 2,500 cattle for about 20 miles. And they had some walkover way stations on either side of that muster. And the animals, this is in, the animals they lost about 30 kilos on average. So that's about 60 pounds on average. And initially they thought it was just they were dehydrated, then they'd drink some water, and that weight would go back on. But they drank some water and the weight didn't go back on. And when you've got two and a half thousand animals at 30 kilos and at $5 a kilo, that becomes a very, very expensive move.
Yeah.
And there's a cost to that those animals will need to put that weight back on. So if you're finishing them, there's all the emissions and the footprint that comes out of that. But once
Yep.
again, when that beef gets onto that supermarket shelf, um, it's sitting next to the one that looks, red and like beef and all those things next to it.
Yeah.
And how, unless there's the data that goes with that, um, there's no way for the consumer to know, but there's also no way to actually create a premium for the better product because they look identical. So that whole data pipeline and the sharing of the data, because if one person's got it, locked up in their own system and doesn't share it, you can't create value unless other people have it. So that's
Yeah.
such a hugely important part of this whole process. And back to what you said earlier on, and I could not agree with this more, that you know sustainability includes financial sustainability, includes social sustainability. It's like a tripod. And if you've ever
Mm.
tried to stand a tripod up that doesn't have three legs, you know how difficult that is. It'll just fall straight over.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, if we're really serious about these regenerative practices and sustainable practices, I think that we need to be convincing the grocers and those of us who are along the line at scale to participate in organized supply chains. And I think, I'm not sure that we're ever going to get paid for that really, but if we really are serious that it's the right thing to do, we're going to have to figure out how to absorb that into our cost, just like everything else that is absorbed into the cost. And, I know that all these other items that Walmart sells that Walmart has leaned on, and other retailers as well have leaned on supply chains to do better by the environment. They're not paying more for that item. There's just an expectation that you figure out how to integrate the right practices and the right tools into every supply chain in order to do the right thing by the world.
But there's a big efficiency piece in that as well, because
Mhm.
going back to say that Northern Australian or Northern Western Australian advantage, um, if it's going to take you an extra 60 days to put that weight back on that cattle that you just walked for 20 miles, um, there's a lot of costs associated with that. And
Yeah.
obviously you can't necessarily it's not I'm not saying for a second that it's cheaper or it's easy to do, because if those animals are not near where you can get a truck to or something like that to load them, or
Yeah.
there's complexities involved, but there's also a lot of
Mhm.
efficiencies
And I
that
think that's
come
one
into
thing,
it.
and this is why this makes so much sense for us, those of us who live in Bentonville. There are over 1,500 consumer product goods companies, CPG companies who have offices here. And I think if you got them all in a room and you said, hey, when the retailer forces you to do better by the environment, to do better by your suppliers, to do better, have you lost money or made money? And the efficiencies that they gain through all that, just to your point, whether it's 20 pounds or 30 pounds that you have to reload on an animal, which is very expensive, or
Mhm.
whether it's having less wasted space in the carton or in the packaging, or get more product into
Yeah.
a pallet
Think about the
than you
square.
did
Yeah.
before.
Yep.
I mean, those, you make money on that back end.
Yep.
And I'm a firm believer that that's exactly what will happen in the beef business when we figure out how to get efficient. And the efficiency comes from our being embracing regenerative practices.
On that note, some of the sustainability uh, conversation has become politicized over not just in the last few months, but over the last decade or so. And what you said, if it's more efficient, there's a lower environmental footprint, companies are making more money. There's no innate need for that to become a political hot potato. There's a lot of win-win-wins for everyone. So
Hmm.
do you think there's a need to put effort into trying to, change that conversation? So you're creating those win-win-wins and trying to stop the negativity, or is that kind of too high? Is
I
that a bigger challenge?
I think maybe and that may be a symptom of, and I'm not picking on any company specifically, but right, like sustainability initiatives even a few years ago was something to be, let's stand up on stage during the shareholders presentation and talk about, and I'm not picking on anybody in particular, but just right, like it did feel kind of, it could feel kind of fluffy, or it could feel like something that they're just going to do for a year. But I think more and more so, and we've heard this even recently from a very large retailer of like, back to what Lamar said, of we're focused on sustainability initiatives that are profitable, right? Like it's got to be something that makes sense financially so that it's long lasting. Because this is, if just is something that we're signaling and is something that it's just not going to last, right? It's going to last 9 months, 12 months, and just kind of a feel good. So I think the more we can communicate those real, and Ash, you have better take on this, I'm sure, but like the more we can communicate those real sustainability initiatives, like I know some of the stuff you're working on that actually have real benefits, and show some of those benefits. I mean, the more we can share that data, I think the better, right? Like, and that's like the regenerative ag that Lamar mentioned. I mean, there's a real kind of grassroots, sorry, fun. There's a that like for that, right? Like the folks have seen how that has actually really benefited their land, and it's like I'm all in, right? Like this is no longer political if I'm seeing the real financial benefits to my operations. So um, yeah, Lamar, you.
Um, Quickly before we go, because we're getting close to time, um, is there anything that's needed in terms of technology, policy, investment, communications, anything that you think is needed to have, to help accelerate the work that you guys are doing?
Well, I think that our technology for ag has been very hard to adopt out on the ranch.
Mhm.
Connectivity is the changing of that, whether it's satellite connectivity or or um, through antennas or whatever, that once we can get that connected, a lot of these tools are out there. And I know it's been frustrating to the technology folks who have adopted some really great tools for the beef supply chain that have not been adopted. But I think that we're on the verge of those things really taking off because of the connectivity, not only the connectivity through satellites or whatever, but supply chain connectivity. When you can do that across the board, I think you can solve a lot of the problems. There's a lot of folks out there, and we're all going to be, all three of us are going to be at the Ag Tech conference for livestock in Dallas next week, and there's a lot of great ideas out there and a lot of tools that are there, and they just have not been able to make it all work because of that. If it's just for one segment, it's just a taller silo of data. And if you're not connected in the supply chain in some way, shape, or form, then you don't benefit from that great technology that's in one segment. So that's my answer there. So.
And before we go, is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't already discussed?
This has been so much fun. I just
appreciate it.
Really appreciate you letting us have some time on your podcast to share our vision and what all that we're up to. And so thank you so much, Ash.
Yeah, appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you next week.
Lamar, Neil, thank you very, very much for joining me.
Thanks, Ash.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Ash Cloud. Please subscribe to Ash Cloud if you have enjoyed this podcast, where I will continue to discuss food sustainability with guests who bring a deep understanding of the environmental, political and cultural challenges facing our society and creative ideas on how to address them.